Okay, so I think we are ready to get started. So welcome everyone to this very, very special event. We're so excited to have you joining us virtually. And my name is Caitlin Shea. I am the Events and Media Director for Walt Whitman Birthplace. If you're not familiar with us yet, as you will see today, we are a museum located in Huntington, New York, which is on Long Island. And we're available for in-person tours, so you can come visit us and get a longer tour than you'll be getting today. And we also have many, many virtual events, so we hope that you join us for those. We currently have an opportunity for people to send us submissions of them reading, or you reading, Leaves of Grass. So you make a video, you send it to us, and for Walt Whitman's 202nd birthday, we will be featuring all of these videos on YouTube. So definitely join us for that. There'll also be a live event. So all the details, I'm going to put everything in the comments section, lots of links for us, and of course, links for the Jackson Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center, which is joining us today. We're so excited. And it's also a very special event because I was thinking, I don't think that you could possibly see both museums in one day if you were here on Long Island. It's a long enough trip where you wouldn't have time at either museum. So it's a really special thing that we're able to do this virtual event. So we're so happy we have Joyce Raimondo with us. She's the education director over there. And we'll be hearing from her later in the program. We're gonna start out with the Walt Whitman Birthplace Museum first. And then at the end of the program, we're going to have Christina M. She's a poet, she's a yoga instructor. She was our 2020 Long Island Poet of the Year here at the Birthplace. And she'll be talking about writing poetry about painting, and you'll have an opportunity to write your own poetry and share it with us at the end of the event. I'm just trying to think if there's anything I'm leaving out in this longer intro. I don't think so. We will have time for questions after each tour, but you could also write your questions in the chat just so we can jump right into those quickly. I know what I'm forgetting. I always want to also say thank you so much to everyone who donates to us here at the Birthplace. We really appreciate it. It makes programs like this possible. And even something small like $5, if you can spare it right now, means so much to us. And your presence means so much to us. This is one of our biggest events, and we're just so happy to be connecting with so many people from so many places. So again, thank you so much for being here, and for any type of donations, if you're able to do it right now, thank you so much. Okay, so now we're gonna jump in. I am gonna warn people, we're having a little bit of an internet issue over at the Birthplace, but we're doing the best we can. So if there's any cutting out, we'll make it work. That's the name of the game. So we are going to hear from Iris Jumper. And Iris Jumper started at the Walt Whitman Birthplace 4 years ago as a volunteer. Today, she is the tour guide supervisor responsible for training all the new tour guides. Before that, she studied, researched, lectured, and wrote about ancient civilizations and their customs. She is presently working on her first novel. And then joining Iris Jumper, we have Sophia Taryn, who is our administrator at the Birthplace. She's amazing. She started recently, and she's just been jumping in with events like this. And she is a writer, educator, and a master's student at Adelphi University, where she teaches creative writing. Okay, that's a mouthful. I'm gonna go over to you guys now.
Hi, welcome to our interpreter. And behind me is the house where Walt Whitman was born. In the Interpretive Center here, we highlight the amazing life of Walt Whitman from the time he is a young man born here in West Hills, Long Island, until the time he dies 3 months before his 72nd birthday. I'm standing in front of a wall of photos. Walt loved the camera, and the camera loved him. He was very interested in seeing how the self would pass through time and space as a person got older. We start out on top with the third photo from the left with the working man Walt. His hands are on his hips, his hat is off to the side, and his shirt is kind of open. That's the image that he put in the first edition of his press, which only had 11 poems and none of them had titles. But when you open the book, there was that picture of Walt. And as time went on, he morphed into the bohemian Walt. He let his hair grow long, he let his beard grow long, he hung out in a bar in Greenwich Village. And finally, he became the good, great poet. And towards the end of his life, he was a sage and a prophet of poetry. We have these wonderful panels that go all around the room. We also have artifacts and different items from Walt's life, like the desk that he used when he was a school teacher. The first panel starts out when he is a young man growing up on Long Island. That's his mother, Louisa, and his father. And he didn't live on Long Island for a very long time, but he actually loved Long Island. He walked from one end of the island to the other. When he was a little boy, after the family moved to Brooklyn, he came back here every summer and stayed with his grandparents who lived in Cold Spring Harbor. And Walt was very proud of the fact that his generations went back for 200 years before he was even born. As a teenager, he came here and taught school. He taught in one-room schoolhouses, and he taught as many as 80 students at a time. He even took time off and published his first newspaper. It's called The Long Islander. Even though he sold it after a year, it's still being published today. Another very interesting panel over there that a lot of people don't know about this part of Walt's life was his time during the Civil War in Washington, D.C. He went there originally to find his brother Jeff, who had been wounded in the Battle of Fredericksburg. Washington, D.C. at the time accepted the worst wounded soldiers, and there were over 50 hospitals. They weren't really hospitals. They were government buildings, people's homes, tents, wherever they can find a bed. And Walt went in and out looking for George to find him. He was greeted pretty much everywhere he went by mountains of legs and arms. And it took him a while to find George, and George was fine. He just had a wound in his cheek. But Walt could not get the sight of these poor wounded boys out of his mind. Some of them laying on cots, laying on blankets on the floor. And for the next several years, he stayed in Washington. He got a job in the State Department. Every day he went to one of the hospitals and he sat with a soldier. He talked to a soldier or listened to them, and he bought them gifts. And many of them afterwards sent cards saying that he had saved their lives by doing that. He said himself that he made over 600 visits during that time and sat with between 80,000 and 100,000 soldiers. He also saw Abraham Lincoln frequently, and Walt developed a very loyal love, actually. He said he loved Abraham Lincoln. We don't really know if they ever met, but according to Walt, they tipped their hat at each other very often while he was in Washington. As time went on, he continued to write, but after that time in Washington, he had a debilitating stroke. And so what happens is he winds up going to recuperate at his brother Jeff's house in Camden, New Jersey, where he lives really for the rest of his life. By that time, his fame had been growing. He had followers even as far as England. Oscar Wilde came to visit. He was even given a gift of a horse and buggy by several of his followers, including Mark Twain and Edwin Booth, the brother of John Wilkes Booth. And Walt just continued to write up until the very end. His house in New Jersey can be visited, the house that he died in. And actually, he continued to write right up until a year before his death. Caitlin, I think you want to read a poem now.
Oh, I think you're muted, Caitlin.
Thank you, Sophia. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And when you see this poem, you can see how Walt is different from other poets in the way that he writes. So there's not that typical rhyming in each line. And you can also see that the lines sometimes go on. They take up 2 lines per stanza, things like that. So this poem, this is an excerpt because Walt Whitman's poems are actually usually very long. So we don't have time for a whole poem, but for a part of a poem. Song of the Open Road. Afoot and lighthearted, I take to the open road. Healthy, free, the world before me. The long brown path before me, leading wherever I choose. Henceforth, I ask not good fortune. I myself am good fortune. Henceforth, I whimper no more, postpone no more, need nothing. Strong and content I travel the open road. You road I enter upon and look around. I believe you are not all that is here. I believe that much unseen is also here. Here is realization. Here is a man tallied. He realizes here what he has in him. The past, the future, majesty, love. If they are vacant of you, you are vacant of them. Gently, but with undeniable will, divesting myself of the holds that would hold me, I inhale great draughts of space. The east and the west are mine, and the north and the south are mine. I am larger, better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness. It's a very beautiful Walt poem, and I suggest everyone look more into Walt if they are not that familiar yet with his poetry. All right, and Iris, we're going to go back to you now.
We're looking at a painting of Walt by Thomas Eakins. It was actually one of Walt's favorite paintings. Walt is remembered as the father of free verse. This was a radical way of writing poetry that was so different at the time and broke with every convention that was known about poetry. Free verse is poetry that follows the rhythm of a natural speaking voice. It doesn't necessarily rhyme. It is a free flow of words with lines of every length, from single words to much longer. Walt also used the form of writing known as stream of consciousness. As a young boy, he was exposed to a radical Quaker preacher Eliza Hicks, who preached on transcendentalism, and that pretty much stayed with him his whole life. Stream of consciousness, it imitates the natural flow of thinking in long run-on sentences, sometimes just one word, and goes on and on and on. Walt is also known as the father of democracy. He was known as the poet of democracy. He criticized the material world of his time and the preoccupation with business. He believed in a world that had universal peace, brotherhood, and unity for all life. He believed in individual freedom and democracy and equality for all. I think that's something that we're all trying for still. We're going to go over to the house now.
And I know something else about the way Walt wrote.
All right, Sophia and Iris, you're cutting a little bit.
Trying to imitate. Okay.
We can hear you better now.
Oh, great. Is that good?
Yeah, much better. Forgive us our internet issues over here. Getting these older houses to be hooked up to it is a challenge. All right.
Walt's father built this house in 1810. Both sides of the family were farmers for many generations, but Walt's father wanted to break away from that and do his own thing. And so he became a carpenter and a builder. He built this house in 1810, actually for another family. When they couldn't keep up with it, in 1816, he moved in with his new bride, and the family lived here for several years, and Walt was born in this house in 1819. The first thing you notice when you walk in is this amazing entranceway that really pops. It uses color Prussian blue to highlight the architectural details around the molding of the doors, the wainscoting, and even going up the staircase. You also put in this. This is called a Dutch door. Okay, the bottom stays closed, the top can open. There's a skylight in there to let the light in. And the amazing thing that he did, he put a door like this in the front and he put a door like that, the same kind of door in the back. So there would be a wonderful forced ventilation going through the house in the summertime and on a hot day like it is today. This is the parlor. This is a room that the family did not use every day. It was kind of like a special room for company, for recreation. We have the best furniture would be in here. That's a Pures glass. It's a mirror put between two windows that lets more light into the house. You put these amazing 12/8 pane windows in, so plenty of sunshine at a time when there was no electricity, illuminating the whole house. Again, he used the Prussian blue, mantle, cupboard, chair rail to protect the best furniture that would be in here, the brass candlesticks, and the amazing cupboard over there were built in where they had their china, and they would just sit around in chairs, and women would gossip and talk, and the men might play a game of cards. Outside, you might have noticed two lilac trees. There's one right out this window here, and one on the other side. They're just getting in bloom now, and when they are in bloom, they're amazing, and the smell is unbelievable. And you know that Walt used the image of lilac trees often in his poetry. When Abraham Lincoln died and Walt found out about it from his friend Peter Doyle, he was overcome with grief. And he wrote 3 poems to eulogize dear beloved dead president. One of them was When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom. So I imagine Walt being a little boy and these windows open and the smell of those lilacs coming in and wafting through the entire house. And he kept that memory in his head. And many years later, he wrote that poem. And they say that it is one of his most beautiful poems. This is the room that Walt was born in. Call it the birthing room. Walt was born here. In 1821, his mother had her first daughter. There were actually 8 children in the family. Walt was the second oldest. And this room is set up for his mom to give birth and recuperate from the ordeal, which must have been quite an ordeal 200 years ago. Everything in here is for her comfort. You see on that table over there a plate that could be put in the fire. It's metal on the bottom. We know that Walt's grandmother, Naomi from Cold Spring Harbor, came here to help her daughter. Her knife and fork, teapot over there, her kettle's going over there. On the mantle, there's whiskey and wine, maybe, to take the edge off of the pain. And there's a chair in the corner, and I just imagine little Walt sitting in that chair. He would have been about 3 years old when his sister was born. He loved his mother. He was very close to his mother. He said when his mother died, it was the greatest tragedy of his life. And his mother didn't have it easy. Walt's father died within a week of the first edition of Leaves of Grass. Walt's older brother, Jesse, who was a year older than him, had mental problems and had to be institutionalized. And the youngest child that she had, little Eddie, her last child, was born both mentally and physically handicapped. So Walt really took it on himself to be responsible, and he helped his mother, and he helped his family. He helped to support them. So she could be sitting in that chair also, and she could keep her feet warm. Here is a spring bed or rope bed. That's called a key that would tighten the ropes. And when she was ready to go outside and go back to work, this bed could be lifted up, and then this room could become a playroom, another parlor that the children could play in. I'm going to give you a little taste of this tour that we usually give here in hopes that you will come back and see some more, because the rooms downstairs are wonderful, but upstairs is a whole other section of bedrooms and rooms and things that we can explore. This is a dining room, and this was more of a room where the family hung out. This was a place that was casual. There's some toys around because children would play toys. There's a checkerboard leaning on that chair over there, and men might play games, checkers while they were waiting for the women to cook the food. And on the mantle, you see certain things that they would need. that thing on the floor with the handle that you turn and a spit in there, it has a little spout on the end that's a little bit hard to see. But they would roast something in there and they would collect the oil from the animal and they mix it with the rendering of the fat from the animals and they would make candles out of it. Those are the forms over there, the candles. Those are the candles. They were made out of animal fat. They were kind of smoky and didn't light up very well. So all this would have been in the kitchen. The making of the candles, they made soap out of the animal fat, the ironing and all that. There's also a churner over there to make, they had a cow so they could make butter and milk, had milk and make butter and cheese. This is the best that the family ever lived. They never lived in a house like this big before. And they lived very well when they lived in this house. This is called the Dutch oven and they baked bread in that. That's yolk to carry buckets of water from the well inside and milk from the cows. And over there on this bureau or this shelf thing over there, that's the different things that they used to store wood, store food, and they used to store food and to prepare the food as well. I just want to point out the staircase to you. This was an unusual feature that Walt's father put in several of the houses that he built. The first riser you see is 10 inches off the ground. And then as you go up these steep stairs, the next to the last riser upstairs is 5 inches, and then the very last riser is 3 inches. So it's like an escalator. When you go up an escalator, it kind of levels off, and then when you come down an escalator, it sort of goes like that. Well, Walt's father built stairs like an escalator, and supposedly he built them that way so that they were easy to use. The only way I think that they would be is they come down these stairs in the dark with just a candle, and of course you can't see the stairs, but if you can just feel with your feet that the stairs are starting to descend, then maybe that would have been a little bit closer, easier for them to come down the stairs. Okay, so back out again. Caitlin, we're going to walk over to the interpretive center where the Wi-Fi is better, and I'll be ready to take questions. You know,
Okay.
that's what, yeah.
Great. And Sophia, if you want to show just the grounds a little bit, I know unfortunately it's a little blurry, but you have a lot of beautiful nature grounds out there. There are some trees that are in bloom. I don't know if you can see, it's pink, the pink flowers, you can kind of see that. Okay, well, while you're walking over, I do want to come back and just say, thank you so much for such a beautiful tour. You both did such a great job together, bringing it together. You know, we had our practice earlier today and it worked out. So thank you so much, Iris and Sophia. And if everyone wants to unmute for just a moment to give a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. We're so lucky to have so many great people that work with us and also volunteer with us. And we are going to take questions. So if you want to write your questions in the chat or you want to come on video and ask them, now is the time for the Walt Whitman Birthplace questions. And you can just unmute and come right onto video if you want to ask that way, or you can type it in the chat. All right, Nancy Hines Glasser is asking, are his poems on display there? Oh, and Sophia, you're muted. Yeah, just unmute, good.
Yes, we have several of his poems here. We have these play cases that you can look at and read.
That's the original Leaves of Grass, the cover, right? What it looked like?
Yes. This right here is the one he printed. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, yeah. And Hillel Cohen is asking, what was the squarish object in the middle of the yard? That is a tough question. I think the Gathering House probably, or the brick circle. You want to just talk about everything that's outside a little bit, Iris?
Okay, well, outside we have we have beautiful grounds here. People come here just to sometimes. We have a statue given to us by the Buddhist Society of Long Island to commemorate a very famous Japanese poet who was influenced by Buddhists who came here, and that commemorates the 50th anniversary of his visit. So we have the statue. It's actually a statue of one of Walt's favorite poses, where he's kind of holding the butterfly on his finger like that. And then we have a little kind of short, kind of little building that we call the Gathering House. And that's actually where the barn would have been, because when Walt's father bought the house, he bought the house in 60 acres. We use it now for exhibits, local artists, and different events. And then next to the house is a little cottage where the caretaker of the grounds lives, and that's where the kitchen would have been. We don't have the kitchen anymore.
And also the well is still there, right, Iris?
And the well is there as well.
Yeah, that must
That's
be.
what I was thinking of, that little square thing. That's the well that the family used. There was an underground stream at the time, so they had plenty of fresh water.
And we can hear the traffic right now, and I just think it's worth mentioning, we're located across the street from Walt Whitman Mall, which is a huge mall. It's a busy roads around us, but we're a little private nature center sort of in the middle of these busy roads.
We're a sanctuary in the middle of commons.
Poetry.
And you know, actually, all is there was an orchard there when the Whitmans were living here. They had 20 acres of apple trees and pear trees and cherry trees. So
Yes, very different back then. We have another question from Sheila Fox. Sheila says, are there any living descendants of Walt Whitman who you are aware of, and have any of them come to the birthplace?
yes, Walt never married, never had children, but he had siblings, and his descendants do come here and visit. And very often when they come, of course, they're very excited to be here. They give us gifts, and they've given us a Bible, which is wonderful, a family, and they gave us, I believe, a chair that belonged to Grandma.
Oh, wow.
All right, does anyone want to come on camera and ask their question? You would just unmute and start talking and it will go to you. No, all right, I think we answered all the questions, which is great. But of course, like you said, Iris, there is so much more to see. We're just sort of abbreviating it here today. All right.
Absolutely. So make sure you come and visit, especially when the lilacs are in full bloom.
Yes, yes. That you can see the bush there next to the house to the right there. It's going to turn purple any day now.
Yeah, they're already starting to bloom, Caitlin, finally.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad. All right. Thank you so much, Iris and Sophia. Beautiful job.
You're welcome.
Okay. So we visited Huntington, New York just now, and now we're going to go over to Springs, New York, also on Long Island. But like I was saying, it would be quite a car trip, over an hour, I think, in all, to move over to there. So you're getting a special treat today. And we're so happy to have Joyce Raimondo with us today. This was her idea. She brought this together so beautifully. So thank you for that, Joyce. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Joyce. My computer's not behaving today. Okay, there we go. Joyce Raimondo is the education coordinator at the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center. She's also an artist and author of 7 art books. She's founding director of Imagine That Art Education. All right, thank you, Joyce. I'm going to hand it right over to you now. Oh, you just have to unmute there.
Hang on.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Iris, that was amazing. I really enjoyed that. That was such a special treat. And it was like entering a world of imagination and appreciation of the arts and the human experience, because Walt Whitman was born, I think you said 1818, and Jackson Pock was born in 1912, and yet they have so much in common. And here we are in 2021, and these universal principles are still core to being a human being, right? So tapping into your stream of consciousness, your imagination, your dreams, expression, and also the deep spirituality that Pollock and Krasner and the abstract expressionist artists shared with the likes of Walt Whitman. So I think it's really interesting. Artists are searching for a truth. So let's see, how did Jackson Pollock go about it? This is modern art. So I am going to screen share just to show you what Jackson Pollock's paintings look like. Excuse me while I get this together. And we're also going to discuss Lee Krasner, but we're going to focus a little more for the poetry talk on Pollock. So I love this photo of Jackson Pollock when he was a boy. He's in the second row on the left. He was born in Cody, Wyoming. And as you can see, he had humble beginnings. His family was a really low income family, and his parents had a really hard time keeping, his father had a hard time keeping a job, and they moved from place to place. And Pollock and Lee are examples of the American dream, right? Pollock rose from poverty to fame and to a middle income and success during his own lifetime. And this is his iconic drip painting, 1950, now at the Met. So what's so groundbreaking about Jackson Pollock? He is not using a brush. He is using a stick, or using the brush like a stick to drip paint. It's drip painting, and he's moving his whole body, and it's 100% abstract art, right? He's let go of the image, and you could see the scale is huge. Now, what I love about this particular painting is you can see the photo. The viewer is gazing at the painting. And when you look at modern art, there's a saying by Marcel Duchamp: the viewer completes the artwork. So what does that mean? You, the viewer, have your own interpretation, your own perception, your own ideas, your own way of looking at the painting. It's not one meaning. It's not even guess what the artist was thinking. You get to experience it in your own way. And I can't wait for Christina to lead us through the poetry portion of this, where you'll get to write your interpretations in a poetic form, inspired by Pollock. So Pollock's paintings are all over the world today. And this photo shows his patron standing with him in the back, Peggy Guggenheim, who was a wealthy heiress, and she used her fortune to support young artists who were part of the avant-garde, forging new ways of making art. And in Pollock's case, she gave him a monthly stipend, and she also lent Lee and Pollock money for the down payment on the house so they could move from New York City to the Springs, Long Island. Now, who negotiated that great deal? It was not Pollock, it was Lee Krasner who managed Pollock's business affairs. So after Pollock died, one painting sold for $200 million. And while he was alive, he did sell his art. The highest selling painting was $8,000, which was a lot of money in the 1950s. So he was a commercial success. But in my opinion, his true success goes way beyond that. It really, not only is it about his art, but his creativity opened up doors for young artists and future generation for years to come. So here we are today, thinking about creativity in a way that was forged by these artists like Walt Whitman and Pollock and Krasner. And all of this happened right here in the barn. This is where I'm sitting, and I'm going to take you through. There's Lee Krasner, his wife, known for years as the wife. And now, of course, she's getting her recognition for the great artist that she was. And she really was responsible for making Pollock a success, as well as the abstract expressionist as a whole. So this is an example of Lee Krasner's work, forging new grounds. She ripped up her old paintings, reassembled them to make collages, painted back into them, also 100% abstract. Maybe it might suggest images, but the basic forms are abstract. And amazing if you see any of these artworks in person, okay? So like Iris, I'm gonna do an abbreviated tour today, only in the barn, and I'll give you a peek of the property. You can come back for many other virtual tours that we have that are more thorough and going through the entire house and property, okay? So let's get some inspiration. Here I am. And this first room in the barn is used for storage. Those are painting racks. This is Lee Krasner's painting cart back there. Now, Lee used this barn studio after Jackson Pollock's death in 1956. They did not paint in here at the same time. When Pollock was painting in here, Lee used a small room in the house on the second floor, okay? Now, Pollock died at a young age. He was 44 years old. He was drinking and driving, and he took another life with him, Edith Metzger. And his mistress, Ruth Kligman, was in the car, and she told the details of exactly what happened that horrible night, okay? So Lee, she lived a long life and was in here for many years until 1984, okay? So on these shelves, you see the art supplies used by Lee, because she was the last person in here. You see her pigments, her mosaic glass pieces. And then there's this strange mystery object, the skull. It's a real human skull that Pollock took from the Art Students League, where he studied in New York City with Thomas Hart Benton. And the skull references his, the students were studying anatomy to learn how to draw the human head and the human figure, right? That's traditional drawing. So Pollock, as well as Lee, when they first started out, they were drawing things that you can see, things you can observe. Lee was studying in Cooper Union in the city. They were drawing people, landscapes, still lives, and also narrative paintings, paintings that tell stories. Gradually, Pollock-Krasner and the modern artists go within. And similar to Walt Whitman, and it's very moving to me, this idea of going into your spirituality and finding a truth. And that poem that was read, that Walt Whitman poem, Following Your Own Path, right? And the poem to me suggested letting go of the material world so you can go deeper within. And that's what Pollock and Krasner and the abstract expressionists did in a sense. They're no longer looking at the material world and replicating it on a canvas. They're going deep within themselves and painting the invisible, emotions, right? Imagination, dreams, your subconscious, and so on. So here's the floor where Pollock created his famous drip paintings. He laid the painting on the floor, and sometimes accidentally, the paint would drip and spill onto the floor itself. So this is not a work of art. This is just the accidental spills and splatters. But this is a national landmark because it really shows the process of these two great artists. And if you look really now, I'm going to show you a photo and touch upon some of what makes Pollock so groundbreaking. So this is by Hans Namath, and you could see Pollock is breaking all the rules of traditional painting. He takes the painting off the easel, puts it on the floor. He said, I work from all four sides, similar to the Indian sand painters of the West. Pollock had gone to MoMA, and he saw Native American artists dribbling sand down. That was one of his influences, right? There's no top and bottom to the painting. And gravity pulls the paint down, so in a sense, you have more control of what the paint is doing. He's also not touching the painting. He's painting and drawing in the space above the painting. And he's using house paints. How radical is that? Okay? Now, he's not using art materials. And one of his major influences was the Mexican muralist Siqueiros, who held a workshop in New York City and encouraged his students to use non-art materials, industrial materials, okay? But Siqueiros still made representational images. Pollock takes that idea a step further. He takes the stick, as I said, you stir paint with that, that's an art tool, right? He's using house paint. And he's even using basters to squirt the paint. Now, I'm being super brief. Pollock didn't wake up one day. This wasn't just like, he wasn't an untrained artist. It took years for him to come to this approach of painting, right? He studied, Lee studied, and gradually it gave way to this type of abstract expressionist art. Now, what makes abstract expressionism unique is that it's very physical, okay? So it's ripping up the painting, tearing the painting, scraping, dripping, swooshing the paint on, and so on. But it's done very methodically. Now, as I said, after Pollock died in 1956, Lee came in here, and a year later, and here she's shown with her amazing paintings that she painted on the wall. Thursday, which is tomorrow, I'm going to give a talk specifically about bereavement and art, focusing on Lee and other artists who express loss in their art. And that was another great connection of Walt Whitman, how he expressed his sorrow through his poetry. So up here are Lee's marks. You see them up there? She was my height, like around 5'4". So how did she get all the way up there? Once in a while, she used ladders, but she preferred to use her own body, almost like a dance of paint. You see that? Pollock and Krasner are action painters. They're moving, they're in action, and the final result captures their movement in a very evident way. Now, the mystery of the barn is that this floor solely was used by Pollock, but Lee was in here after him. So here you could see the floor was actually covered when they were both alive. It was winterized. So it was covered up with these boards. And later on in 1987, when it became a museum under the auspices of Stony Brook University, the conservators came in here, peeled off the whiteboards, peeled off the paper, and what did they find underneath? Pollock's floor preserved forever. So I do hope you come here to see how spectacular this is. It's simple and spectacular at the same time. So I'm wearing slippers right now that we give you. So I'm going to take them off so I could show you the property. Okay, so bear with me. While I'm doing this, does anybody have any questions? You can put them in the chat and Caitlin will read them. Any ideas? Now, all art, you have to put it in the context of the time. It doesn't come out of a vacuum. So Pollock and Krasner were working in the 40s and the 50s in New York City originally. And what is going on at that time? Of course, it's World War II, right? Pre-World War II and post-World War II. It's a devastating time in history. And not only are people dealing with ethical questions and questions of morality, and everything you know to be true is sort of wiped away. Like, how could people be so cruel, right? But there's something else. The artists from Europe are exiled, the avant-garde, because of Hitler. They flee and come to New York City. Many of them also come to the East End. And the older artists, poets, and so on, and Christine is going to talk about the poetry school, they mix in all these creative minds mixed together at the cafes, at the beach parties out here, and this gives rise to tremendous creativity. So there's the barn, and this is Eastern Long Island, really what it was like years ago, and parts of Eastern Long Island are still like this. It's spectacularly beautiful. The light is just so bright because we're surrounded by oceans and bays. The barn was originally there, and it was moved here by Pollock and his friends so as to not block the view. And the property is 1.5 acres. And this is the original farmhouse that they purchased. It was real country living. There was no bathroom in the house. There was no central plumbing, heating. There were 200 people in the whole town. They were fishermen and farmers. They had to use an outhouse. So today, of course, it's very touristy, it's very expensive, but during that time, it was bohemian. You know, you had your locals, so to speak, and then you had this overlay of all these artists who were young artists who could afford to come out here and assemble. And there's many, many artists. If you look up abstract expressionists, the New York School, or abstract expressionists, Eastern Long Island, you'll see how many of these great artists had studios here. So I'm going to take some time now to show you Pollock doing a video. So you can really, a video of Pollock painting, so you can really see his technique. Because you might, stereotypical. He's drinking, he's an alcoholic. These are bohemian young artists, they're flinging paint. No, that's not true. First off, he was sober for 2 years when he made his great paintings. He sought medical care, and he was very faithful to this doctor who helped him. The doctor actually told him, go within, and Jungian psychology, right? Think about your subconscious, your dreams, and so on. That was an influence for Pollock. And he was made remarkable artworks during that period of sobriety. And after he started drinking, sadly, he declined. He became so depressed that he wasn't even painting the last year of his life. So that being said, I'm going to show this video. And I think you'll get an idea of how methodical really his method was. Now, while I'm showing this in a relaxed way, you can jot down some ideas about his movement, his technique, or anything that comes to mind, just words, phrases. And maybe later you might want to use those for your poems, but it's just free flow. Now, when Pollock is painting, he is not working from a sketch or a theme or a title. He said, the painting has a life of its own. I let it lead. And I think that Iris mentioned something like that with Walt Whitman's free verse, right? Not exactly the same thing, but I think I heard a similar idea. So it's almost like an idea of surrender, right, to the process. And Lee Krasner also said that she didn't will the painting, right? She was faithful to the process itself. So it's one mark leads to the next. It's improvisation. Now, when you see Pollock's original paintings, you will notice that they're filled with not only line and color, but also texture. Sometimes the paint is gooey, or it stains, or it's matte, or glossy, or shiny, and so on. Sometimes he would sprinkle sand or glass into the painting. So you really can't get that from a computer. So I urge you to go to the Whitney Museum of American Art, where you will see the painting that he's working on. And I'll show you what it looks like. This is it. And to see this in real life is breathtaking. There's so much energy in this painting. You could also see Lee's paintings at the Whitney, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and the Met. So, and I'm sure in many other places, wherever you are around the world or the country, okay? So, because of our little poetry class, I was inspired to write a little, I don't even know if it's a poem, but I'll share it. I just wrote it yesterday. I just write whatever pops into my mind. And this is the spirit that I give all these programs. Why? Why do artists paint? Is it a need or a want? A luxury for a privileged few, or an inalienable right? Why? That's my poem. I think it's pretty good. Anyway, no, Caitlin and Iris and Christina, like already, you really did inspire me. I'm so excited about this. So now I'll take a couple of questions or ideas or thoughts, and then we'll go right into the poetry aspect. So any questions? Caitlin?
Well, before we do that, Joyce, I want to do a big round of applause for you, because thank you so much for sharing that. That was amazing. Everyone wants to unmute for just a second to give a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Learned a lot.
Thank you so much, Joyce. It's beautiful. And we have many questions. So
Okay.
what I'm thinking is we'll go through a few now, and then after our writing session, we can take more. Is that okay, Joyce? If we do-
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, just because, yeah, a lot of interest, but we don't want to take too much time.
I'll try to be brief in my answers for a change. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see. Did Lee or Jackson use poetry also during the 1940s? Any recognized known poets have books in the Krasner Pollock collection? That's interesting.
Those are two really good questions. I do not, I've never heard of either of them writing poetry. And I'm not sure if they have poetry books in the collection. I'm really not sure, but I will check. And I will answer your question. If you email me, it's joyce@imaginearted.com. I'm happy to check that and get back to you. Good question.
Oh, and that's reminding me too, Joyce, just so everyone knows, all the links for both museums are in the chat there. So you can check out all those links. If you click them now, it'll open up elsewhere on your phone or your computer. So if you want to click on that, just so you can get more information after this event. And also in that email that I sent earlier, there's a lot of information too.
And
Okay.
also, I'm not really that familiar with it, and I think Christina can probably do a better job, but the New York Poetry School, these poets were very close with the artists. And Frank O'Hara was one of them. So she'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, we had that on our Facebook, a Frank O'Hara poem. Christina put it on there for us. It's wonderful. All interconnected. Then we have a question from KB. Are there Pollock or Krasner paintings at the Guggenheim Museum in Venice?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Peggy Guggenheim was a collector of Pollock and Krasner. I've never been there, but yes, of course. And the Peggy Guggenheim Museum in Venice, that was like her bright shining star of what, like her legacy of, she left that behind of these amazing artists that she collected.
Yes. All right, and then we have a question from John Masterwick. Did Jackson work for the WPA?
Yes, he did. In fact, Lee and Pollock, I know I tell the story a lot of how they met, where they met originally at a WPA dance, but I don't usually tell the story because they met at the dance. He was drunk, he stepped on a foot, but they didn't really talk, and she didn't even give it a second thought. But then later she went to his art studio. They were in an exhibit together about a year or so later. And then she recalled, oh yeah, isn't this that guy that like stepped on my foot? So for the sake of brevity, I don't usually mention that, but originally they did meet at that dance where he was a little clumsy.
That's a fun fact. I like that. Then we have a little bit of a detour question, but also interesting, from Nancy Hines Glasser. What kind of tree is that outside? It is very beautiful.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay. I know we have so much beautiful nature here in Long Island, but.
So we'll take one more question so we have time for the poetry.
All right, this is our last one for now. Noreen Neville asks, what's the name of the cemetery where many abstract expressionists are buried? Is it nearby where you are now?
Yeah, good question. It's called Green River Cemetery, and it's right down the street on Accabonac Road, about a mile away, mile or two. And yes, Pollock has a big boulder that marks his place. Lee has a small boulder, and de Kooning and many, many great artists are buried there alongside the locals, the Millers and so on. It's really interesting.
Oh, wow.
So, I would encourage you, if you want to come to the house, you have to make a reservation, pkhouse.org. If you want to see the other Zoom programs we have, you can go to pkhouse.org. And you need to sign up for both of those experiences. And if you know of a group that wants to have a Zoom tour, like a library or school, they can contact me as well. So thank you so much. And I'm so excited to write the poem. And I love, Christina's such an amazing poet. I went to her website, I was like blown away. And I love this. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you so much. That was incredible, learning so much. And Christina has been with us many times on Zoom. She was the first person that we featured for a virtual event, which was a little bit dicey that first time, but she's been with us so many times, and she's shared her wonderful poetry and her writing skills. It's ekphrastic poetry. I think you'll talk about a little bit today, Christina, writing about paintings, which is what we'll be doing. I'm just going to share a little bit about Christina with you. Christina M. is the author of the Eldrin Award-winning sci-fi femme poetry collection, Liberating the Astronauts, Aqueduct Press 2017, the chapbooks Wake, Breathe, Move, Finishing Line Press 2015, and For the Girl's Eye, Dancing Girl Press 2014. She is currently the Oceanside Library Poet in Residence, and she is the founder of Poets in Nassau, a reading circuit on Long Island. She teaches English and creative writing at Nassau Community College, where she also serves as editor-in-chief for the Nassau Review. Her poetry has appeared on gallery walls, in the Ekphrastic Poster Show, on car magnets for the Living Poetry Project, and in various journals, both online and in print, while her prose frequently appears on Book Riot. She also has conducted poetry readings and workshops nationwide. In her non-writing life, when she's not teaching yoga, she's watching the Game Show Network. I should also mention she was our Poet of the Year here for Walt Whitman Birthplace in 2020. And it was just an amazing experience. She really revolutionized what that role is. And she's doing that again today. So thank you, Christina. I'm gonna hand it over to you now.
Hi, everybody. Hello. I have to say, Iris and Joyce, that was really wonderful and how special. And when people give tours, they know dates and things that are really important. I am not a person that's going to be able to answer anything about dates or years, but I will do my best to point you in the right direction. Feel free to ask me anything as we go along. I do want to talk about the idea of Whitman first. Whitman, we call him like the father of American poetry. And as Iris was stating before, this stream of consciousness. And he has a lot of poems with like a lot of long lines. And he's always using verbs that end in ing, and it moves the poem forward. And then he has poems that have shorter lines. And Whitman believed that everybody and everything is equal, and that when we view the world, we should include every single thing in it. And we get those experiences through all of our senses, our five senses. So keep that in mind as we go through. And a little bit then also about the New York School, because the New York School of Poetry is actually how I got into the art world. So it's I guess flipping what we were just talking about, where Frank O'Hara, we've mentioned him already. Frank O'Hara was one of the New York School poets, and he was called like the painter's poet. And it was during this time where everybody was friends with everybody else, and all kinds of writers and artists and all kinds of people in the art world and creators were coming together and really bouncing ideas off of each other's work. So the New York School poets do include Frank O'Hara. He's like the biggest one. You might have heard of lunch poems, where he would go out into the world on his lunch break and take everything in, much like Whitman used to do, and he would write about it. There's also Kenneth Koch, John Ashbery, and Barbara Guest. Those are some of the bigger names in the New York School. And then kind of around the same time in American poetry history was also the Beat generation going on. And they were a little bit more revolutionary and a little bit more railing against the system. And so Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg might be names that you've heard of. And they were also inspired by Whitman. And O'Hara and Ginsberg especially, their poetry has specific references back to Whitman. You will also see, well, I don't know if it's there anymore, but there used to be along the Hudson River in New York, there used to be a railing that had engraved a piece of a poem from Whitman and a piece of a poem from O'Hara. And so those two things together overlooking the Hudson River. So just a little bit tidbit of information if you're going around New York looking for poetry. I'm going to share my screen. And it's just a Word doc. It's nothing special. And some notes to self were there. So we're going to get rid of those. And we're talking about ekphrastic poetry. And ekphrastic basically is poems about visual art. And we can break it up into two schools. One is the old school ekphrastic poetry, where it's mostly about what you see. So it describes exactly what's there in front of you. So we'll talk about painting. So it describes the painting. It uses verbs. It has a strong voice, but it doesn't interpret the painting. So it's not going to tell us what it's about. It also includes spatial relationships. So top to bottom, bottom to top, starting from the center and moving out, or starting from one edge and moving to the other. Also, it will talk about the shapes. So maybe objects that are round, maybe objects that are square, and colors. The new school of ekphrastic poetry mostly interprets, and it will say what is there, but it will also give descriptions that use simile and metaphor, and it will link to universal ideas and include themes. It is your choice if you want to do one, the other, or both. But if you think back to the painting about how Pollock was going through his process of painting, we can think back and we think about those actions, right? And the verbs that are being used. Okay, so we can think about actions, any words involving actions, or along with actions, there's also stillness. I think it's a really interesting video to watch because while there's a lot of action, the video has no sound. So we're able to watch something in action without having any sound distractions, which is really different, because if you're in an artist studio, you do hear things. But here was something where there was no other distraction through the ear. It was only with the eyes. So we can think about actions. We can also think about all of these other things. Okay, and Joyce is going to share a painting with us in a moment. And when you look at the painting, you can think about how you're experiencing the painting with all of your senses. So before, where the viewer completes the artwork, think about that idea and how you can complete the artwork. And that also applies to poetry. The reader completes the poem. So whatever you mean is not necessarily what your reader is going to get. So we can think about just jotting down ideas by way of sight, colors, sizes, shapes, the distance of things between each other, or the distance of you from the painting, the brightness or the darkness, where there's light or not light, spatial relationships, again, top to bottom, bottom to top, left to right, inner to outer, outer to inner. We can think about sound. A painting itself might not have sound, but as you're looking at the painting, does it do anything for sound? Or what sounds are you hearing right now around you as you look at the painting, and does that influence your experience? Think about smell. And in smell, we can describe as intensity. So if you are somebody who has been in an art studio, you can think about the smells that happen. You can think about, or if you've been around a house that's been painted, think about that kind of idea. With touch, touch can include temperature, weight, texture. And then Joyce was using a really good word, like I think you said gooey, and I think that's just a wonderful word to use, like for touch. And taste, bittersweet, sour, salty, umami. These, of course, are all of our senses that we are all aware of. We learn this like in kindergarten, and sometimes we forget about it. And this is really how we experience all things in the world. So we can think about these things. And when you're looking at the painting, maybe just write down your experience. It could be words, it could be phrases, it could be full sentences. Just do what Whitman did and just write. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about like how we can make that into a poem if it's not a poem already. And before you go, I'll give you a homework assignment because I always do. And you're free to do whatever you wish with that. So I'm going to stop my share, and I think that we should go to that painting and we should take a look at it, and we'll take maybe like 2 or 3 minutes just to write some stuff down. And the chat is open if anybody wants to ask questions in the chat. Actually, I do have a question. Does this painting have a title?
This is number 27.
Okay, and do with that what you wish, everybody. So maybe take 2 minutes to write down your experience in any way, shape, or form. You can include ideas from the video as well as from the painting, and then we will reconvene in about 2 minutes. And I know that 2 minutes is probably not enough time for you to get all of your thoughts out, but that's okay. You can continue to write as I talk. I'm going to share my screen again, if that's okay. I'm going to go into, when we're thinking about how do we put this down on a page and what exactly do I want to write, I'm sharing a poem by Frank O'Hara, actually, and I'm not sharing it to read it, but I'm sharing it just to show some ideas.
Oh, Christina, Joyce, can you stop your screen share?
Oh.
I always wondered what would happen if two people did it at once, and that answers that question. Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right, Christina, we can see it now.
Can you see it? Okay, great. Okay, well, that answers that question. New things about Zoom. All right. So, do you want your poem to have stanzas? And stanzas are just groups of lines together. Do you want to use complete sentences, or do you want to use fragments? And both of those options are going to give very different outcomes. So something that has fragments is going to be more up to interpretation. Something that uses sentences sometimes might sound not like a poem at all. Sometimes people, well, that's not a poem. And we can think about how a line breaks, meaning where it ends. It doesn't necessarily need to go to the end of the page. So you can choose to end on a word that you think is important. You can choose to end a line mid-thought to make somebody go on to the next line. You can choose to go all the way to the edge of the page and keep going and going. Whitman did that a lot. You can use the perspective of I. This poem does use the word I a lot. You can rhyme or not rhyme. Okay, when we think about sound, it's not only the experience of the sound of the content, but it's also the sound of the poem. Okay, a few other poems here. This is a very short poem. Okay, and we can see that it has lines that are about the same length, but then one of them is really short. And sometimes if you play around with line length, you can draw attention to particular lines. other things to think about? Do you want a really long poem or do you want a short poem? So far we saw really short poems. This is a poem by Kenneth Koch of the New School called One Train May Hide Another. And I'm just going to show you. It has some long lines, it has some short lines, and it just goes on and on and on and on, like a train would. So sometimes in poetry, we say that the structure of the poem follows the content of the poem. And this is one of those poems where the structure does follow the content. It's about trains and being on a train, and it's a full train of thought. In poetry, sometimes we use repetition. We can think about how something sounds versus how something means. So these are all ideas that you can think about as you look at your paper with all this information on it about your experience. Going back to the document, let's talk again, just to remind ourselves about the idea of old school and new school. When we are experiencing the poem, when we are experiencing the painting, do we want to simply describe it? Or do we want to interpret it? Or do we want to do both? Okay, so those are all questions you can ask yourself, and you might not know yet. Okay. So you can take a look at what you have. Maybe you already have a poem, or maybe you just have notes for a poem. Maybe you're not sure if you have a poem or not. Okay, and all of these things are perfectly fine. Nobody's being quizzed on this. For your homework, by the way, for your homework, I will challenge you to write a poem of at least 12 lines that has some line breaks in the middle of the thought. That is your challenge. If you choose to accept it, fantastic. If not, I won't know. You're not being graded. Okay, does anybody have any questions?
I think there was a question actually in the chat. Oh no, you answered it already, Christina. Good.
Yes, yeah.
Not a question. I just want to thank you for stimulating ideas for free write. I enjoy ekphrastic poetry. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Rattle, that journal,
Yes.
but they do have a website that runs an ekphrastic challenge several times a year. And it's always very intriguing because the poets pick one poem that they like, and then the artist picks a voice that spoke to him about his work or her work. So thank you. I enjoy these.
Yes, yeah, it's really ekphrastic poetry is really interesting because it's experiencing one idea in several ways.
Mhm.
And oh no, what is it? I can't remember. There's a painting there's a poem based on a painting that's based on another painting that's based on a poem. And
Yep.
Of course, I can't remember what it is, but that happens all the time. Yes. Me not remembering, and this thing of people, somebody paints something and then they write about it, and then somebody paints about the poem, and then somebody does another poem about the painting that was about the poem that was about the painting.
Yeah, and it's not just a two-dimensional art. I've worked with sculptors and choreographers, and it's fascinating when you get a bunch of different and musicians, when you get a bunch of different artists in the same room riffing on each other's work. It's almost like jazz.
Yeah, I'm in the chat. I'm just typing something that you can all Google or Bing or in your search engine. The Visible Poetry Project does, I don't know if they did it this year because of circumstances of COVID, but they have a call every April, every year before April, and in April they put out 30 videos. So they pair filmmakers and poets together, and then there's 30 mini videos of poetry. And it's an amazing project. And I was fortunate enough a few years ago to have one of my poems selected. And you submit poems, the filmmakers read the poems, and then they make a film. And sometimes the poet is involved in the film. For mine, I was like, do what you want to do. The artist was Dana Sink. He was an animator, and what he did for my poem was something that I had never even thought about. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So yeah, it's any kind of crossover is what I consider ekphrastic. It does come from a certain thing, meaning to visualize.
Yeah, I would encourage people to check with their local arts organizations, because I know down here in Southwest Florida, There's an annual thing where poems are submitted, and then I think there are 20 artists who select a poem that spoke to them and create a work of art. And then they have an evening where, again, you get to see the poetry next to the art that it inspired, and vice versa. So when you check with your local art leagues, and they're all over the place, sometimes you can find a program like that that's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as we're going on here, did anybody come up with think that they have a very short poem?
I have one that I wrote while we were showing the Pollock-Krasner paintings.
Yeah. Based on the painting, would you like to share it?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you.
We have
It's
time
short.
for maybe like 3 or 4 people to share. So go ahead.
Okay, shall I read? I
Yes,
just
go ahead.
wrote this while we were going through the studio. And thank you for that
perfect.
wonderful tour. I don't need my art to be pretty. What I need is release, a dialogue, within or without. But Jackson, all I get from you is pain. Even without knowing your life, your violent box cutter slashes mark me. The inherent chaos of your rebellion, a scream in my ear. You snap my bones. Like every revolution, you leave bodies and blood behind you. And you, Lee, the handmaid, sex is ever present. A subterranean Styx, uncrossable for you with only your talent and cleverness. Neither beautiful nor rich, you became his enabler. Never enough. Still you stayed and danced with your canvas, marking and ripping, rearranging, trying to find some structure that would welcome you, not merely tolerate your presence. That's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed that.
The finger
Very
snaps,
nice. This is
Yes.
Mark Nuccio.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
Wonderful.
I
Would
have
you like to read?
Yes, I have a short one.
Sure.
He stood around his canvas, thoughts dripped through his mind, things he didn't want to find, yet splashes and drips of color expressed his every thought as he transferred his life from his splattered hand. So that everyone could see. Then he collapsed with his cigarette and beer. Who would get it? He couldn't care less.
Mm. I love that last line.
Thank you. Okay.
Can you hear me?
In the chat, I believe that Jordan, did you want to read? I saw your name come up in the chat. I think that you said you had something.
Yeah, is my mic working?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, all right, great. Yeah, okay. Number 27 by Jackson Pock. Like the nameless left fielder in pinstripes, the yellow glow of his skin and the afternoon summer light, a day game. The long exposure of his time chasing after balls in the field. That's it.
Thank you. All right. There is a question in the chat that it's a question that we could talk about for hours, but I will just do my best to answer it in a very short way. Sheila is asking about the disjunction between what the painter intends and then creating a poem evoked by a painting that may have absolutely nothing to do with what the painter intended. And what's the point of the painter's intention if no one understands it and takes a digression? And I think that the best way I can answer that as a creator is to say that I sometimes have an intention and I hope that I get that across. And if it's not what the reader takes away from it, I have no control over that. And I think creators just kind of put their work out into the world, and you can write an artist statement and then it's for the world to decide what it is. And if that's not what you wanted the person to get out of it, then you can choose to make another statement or make another piece or to do whatever it is you think that you can do to get your view across. But I think that once something is out in the world, the Emily Dickinson's poem Wild Nights is about two lovers finding their luxury together, and my students usually think it's about pirates. So you can't really control what people interpret. And I understand that sometimes it's important to me what my poems are about, and I do have important messages to send. And I also know that if somebody gets something out of it, that's what they need, then I think I'm okay with that. And some
Christina,
creators aren't okay with it.
I have
Yeah.
something. Christina, I have something.
Okay, I don't see who's highlighted, but go ahead.
Oh, it's Susan Fishbein.
Oh, hi, yes, I see,
from the
now I see you.
Birthplace.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay,
Please.
great. I really tried to focus on the painting number 27. So this is what I'm trying to do. The bands and ribbons of pink and yellow and gray and black and white have danced and sped through all dimension. I
Yeah,
am just
I'm in a meeting. Oh, sorry.
I am just a speck flung and blown off the canvas, returning to merge, to dance and speed in wild frenzy, to merge and melt and be in number 27.
That's beautiful, Susan.
Beautiful, thank you.
That was gorgeous. I'm sorry for the inadvertent interruption.
No worries.
That's all a part of the experience. It's all a part of the experience. So thank you all for sharing. I did put my email in the chat and my website is in the chat. So if anybody wants to send me a poem that they have written from this experience, I would love to read it and I would love for you to share with me. So thank you in advance for that. I'm so grateful. I was grateful to share all of this with you too. I will make a programming note that if anybody is local, I am doing a yoga writing workshop on this Saturday in Limbrook, New York. If you're local and you want to come, it's open to all levels of writing and yoga. You could just sit and watch or lie down and close your eyes. That's fine too. So if you want to come, you can go ahead and do that. Otherwise, yeah, I'm doing online things too. So if you're across a pond somewhere, you can always log in, and I'd be happy to do some more poetry workshopping with all of you. And thank you to Iris and Joyce again for your wonderful tours, and thank you, Caitlin, for always inviting me back. So I'll throw it back to you for sure.
Christina,
We'll
I
always
want
be
to
invited.
just chime in for a second. This is Joyce.
Yes, yes.
I love, the woman asked, well, what if it's not the artist's intention?
Mhm.
And you answered the question so beautifully. And I just wanted to add to that, the technique that Christina used today. It was really interesting because when I worked at the Museum of Modern Art and many other museums for years, we used a very similar technique in teaching people how to interpret art. It's exactly what you did, but not in a poetry format, right? Visual, like literally description and interpretation. And art is communication. So the artists themselves sometimes don't even know exactly what they're communicating. It's a dialogue. It's open-ended. That is the gist. That is the whole purpose of modern art. The idea of perception and individuality. So it was just so great how that dovetailed with the poetry. And I would encourage people to look at paintings like that even when they're not writing poems. Art is always being reinterpreted. You could have a feminist interpretation. You could have a 1950s interpretation. A curator in 2021 is going to interpret the painting differently depending on culture and so on. So all these interpretations, even the experts are always changing their minds. So anyway, thank you so much. So special. I loved it.
Yes, and as always, Christina, beautiful work coming out of your prompts and the way you teach. And so quickly, we have all these beautiful poems suddenly. So it's amazing. And I want everyone to unmute again and give a big round of applause for Christina and really all our presenters.
And you too, Caitlin.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I have all these links in the chat. Like Christina was saying, you can send your poems to her. You can send it to all of us, really. Joyce, I'm sure you would love to read them too. There's emails for all of us. There's links. I'm also, if you look at that email that I sent earlier, there's other links in there too. So you have them in your email, some of them. But it's a lot of information, I know. But I hope that you also take a selfie video for us reading Leaves of Grass for that event that we have for Walt Whitman's birthday coming up May 31st. It's a big, joyous event always. So we hope that you're here for that as well and you partake in it. Walt Whitman was the poet of democracy, so he would love all these voices from all over the place, not even just in the United States, but from many foreign places as well. And Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you very soon. All right. And thank you to our presenters. What an amazing program. You know, it wouldn't be possible in person. So we're making the best of these virtual events, definitely. Thank you so much, everyone.
Super, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Everyone.
Thank you. I love this poetry and art together. Wonderful.
Thank you. Good to see you, Rusty. Rusty's a local poet that has been with us in person before and hopefully virtually too in the near future. Love to hear your poetry. And you're working on ekphrastic poetry too, Rusty, you're telling me.
Yes, I didn't have nothing because Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner are on my list. And I have Bacon done, Degas. Georgiana Houghton is driving me nuts because she really is haunting you in more ways than one. Matisse is done, Chagall. So maybe somebody would like to look at it, but I've been received very well in Paris and everything.
Awesome. Yeah, please share with us.
I will.
Wonderful. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. And again, join us virtually as often as you can.
This was fabulous. I want more art and poetry.
And
Good night,
donate,
everybody.
donate before you go, everybody, donate.
Good
Yes,
reminder.
absolutely. Get those bricks going.
Oh, yes. Oh, we didn't do our brick circle. We have a beautiful outdoor circle of bricks that you can dedicate to a loved one or a poet that you know. Part of our outdoor space. I wish we could show it better, but got the gist of it today, at least.
I know.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.